Який дефіцит державного бюджету України є оптимальним у сьогоднішніх умовах? І ви можете інтерпретувати сьогоднішні умови, як ви вважаєте, належним. Чи будуть структурні реформи, чи не будуть, і в залежності від того давайте свою відповідь. Перша відповідь – від 0 до 3%. Друга відповідь – Б – від 3 до 5%. Третя відповідь – 5% або більше. Четверта відповідь – потрібен профіцит. Доходи мають перевищувати витрати. Будь ласка, ще раз. А – від 0 до 3%, Б – від 3 до 5%, С – більше 5% і Д – не потрібен взагалі дефіцит бюджету. Хвилину часу на голосування. Будь ласка, виводимо результати. Більшість вважає, що дійсно від 0 до 3% досить жорстка політика, стисла. 42% вважають, від 0 до 3% є оптимальний рівень бюджетного дефіциту в Україні. 35%, не набагато менше, майже така сама цифра людей вважає, що оптимальний бюджетний дефіцит має бути від 3 до 5%. 10% вважають з аудиторії, що бюджетний дефіцит має бути більше 5%. І 14% аудиторії вважають, що ми маємо сьогодні мати бюджетний профіцит. Дуже цікаво. І ми переходимо до наступного спікера Володимира Осаковського, головного економіста по Росії та СНД, Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Дякую. English, is this okay? I ask in English. What do you think is the optimal level of the budget deficit? And what does it mean for sovereign and corporate debt? Specifically, how much debt is sustainable for Ukraine? And specifically, can sovereign debt crowd out private debt in Ukraine?
I guess I would say this is a question more like to IMF and other institutions, actually, because to a significant degree, the market perception of this kind of these parameters depends on what do they think about this, frankly, one way or another. But I would say to some, I voted for 1 to 3. I think that some fiscal stimulus, of course, is appropriate in the current situation, but again, the higher than 3%, let's say, budget deficit would, to some degree, start to crowd out private investments, as you suggested. This is a significant amount of money, and it's really hard to see where this money will come from. It's really hard to see how they will come from the available investment resources within the country. So, in order to raise this money, the government will either need to to completely crowd them out or to tap international bank, which could compromise other policy objectives. But let me, from the general economic perspective, let's say general economic outlook perspective, just wanted to remind just global view, let's say, that we are currently in the conditions where the significant several trillions worth of sovereign debt is trading in the negative territory, right, in the negative yield territory. So it's absolutely not the case. Basically what I'm saying is that there is a huge amount of capital which is available for Ukraine to be invested here to finance a deficit and things like that. So everything is possible. There's a huge amount of money. Which could lead to, for example, could be used to facilitate, to finance the economic investment, economic growth and the investment here in this country. So the big question, of course, whether or not this country is capable of attracting it, and of course the whole lots of it depends, lots of the, let's say, component the answer to this question, of course, is in the structural reforms. If they will happen, as I guess I completely agree with Miklos, Mr. Miklos, that if this will happen, of course, everything will happen by itself, and there will be a huge inflow, and it will happen by itself. But one, I guess, interesting thing is that how to link all of these components to, for example, to inflation argument when we discussed this, right? So the country is paying in general, like quite a high interest rates in general, right? And domestically, so on a sovereign level, on a corporate level. I'm talking about the USD rates and local rates and everything. So it does look like that the country is capable of offering to investors some investment projects which are capable of paying quite high interest. Again, in the conditions of negative interest rates, it's quite appealing, right? So what can it be done, I guess? I mean, what kind of structural reforms can facilitate this? I would draw one attention to this, basically opening the local market to the international investors through the links of the National Depository to Euroclear and things like that. So I think in this case, all these global capital markets could start to look at the Ukraine, and even especially on the local side, on the local Ukraine debt, as you know, and the level of yields which are offered locally here is quite appealing. Right now, I think it's possible. Of course, there are investors who are doing this at their great profit, but you know, without this link, you need to find these investors, right, basically. But if you are talking about the big real money accounts, bigger investors with a huge amount of, you know, capital, I think you need to establish this link. Basically, it's a liberalization of access, formally speaking, right, to the local capital markets. And in this case, I mean, the amount of money which can potentially get to this country could be quite substantial, and that could address, this is kind of structural reform which could kind of unlock significant amount of capital inflows to this country, which could be used to facilitate and finance the capital expansion. Just one example, I guess, right? As part of my job, I'm bringing some investors, of these big investors, to some countries in the region, and I did this trip to places like Georgia and Armenia, right? And on this trip, I had actually like big real money accounts who were invested locally in local lari and local dram bonds, right? And that never happened before, and that happened only after these countries have opened to the global investors to this link.
This is fantastic, actually. So you're basically saying that we do have money out there.
A lot of it.
And the yields in Ukraine are potentially attractive, subject to some of the conditions. We need to convince the investors to come to Ukraine. And we need to do structural reforms, as Ivan, as actually everyone on the panel, I think, saying the same thing, that we need, structural reforms. But let me be more specific. What would be one or two examples of specific things which would communicate to the investors that is now the time to come to Ukraine? What do they need? What do you need to tell them when you call them up and say, now is the time that they believe you?
You know, for answering this question, I would actually agree to Mr. Miklos' again, and I think to Jerome as well, that we need to have some showcase, let's say, that the reforms are happening. A lot has been done, like huge amounts of reforms has been done. Market, to some degree, is pricing this. I mean, the yields have dropped quite a lot, but you know, just a lot of people just do not know that all of these things have happened. And so basically better communication, deeper communication. I try to do this on my behalf because through my publications, but I guess just, you know, some showcase examples is also possible.